Hey, it's me, Rob Ryan. I am back with another really important episode of Entrepreneurial Thinkers dropping this week. Wow. In the world we live in, this digital world that we live in, this hyper-partisan, loud, ideologically diverse world that we live in, the things we believe, the very belief sets that we have and how we believe them, why we believe them, how we came to believe them and identify with these beliefs are being used against us daily by the algorithms, by the machines, by AI, in ways that are just generally destructive. So we talk with Matthew Facciani, who is a volunteer PhD level researcher at the University of Notre Dame, about misinformation, disinformation, and kind of everything to do with that inside of both our media ecosystem that we live in, as well as just the general social discourse that we find ourselves in this 21st century world of 2025. I would argue that this is one of those foundational conversations that will attach itself to everything else that we discuss on Entrepreneurial Thinkers with these amazing entrepreneurial thinkers that we talk about these big topics and these big themes, these fundamentally curious questions that we dive into each week. I will argue that what I just did is this conversation for Entrepreneurial Thinkers is going to bind and tie a lot of this together. So I really encourage you to enjoy this episode as much as Matthew and I did making it for you.
We are so grateful to be supported by these community champions: Sales MD, Team Friday, Realist Lab, Kiana Patterson, Diego Chavez, Jer Boucher, Heather Ryder, Janine Sua, Lily Roca, and Steve Kernan.
Hola, hello, hi, bienvenido, and welcome back, or welcome to, if you're joining us for the first time, Entrepreneurial Thinkers, which, as you may or may not know, this is the show where I get to have weekly conversations with, frankly, the best and brightest entrepreneurial thinkers, as I call them, across all sectors and segments of society and industry, as we come together to try to do what my mom implored us to do when I was a little kid growing up in Chicago, which is to leave this world a little bit better than we found it. Today, we're super excited to be joined by Matthew Facciani, who is a volunteer postdoctoral researcher at the University of Notre Dame. I'm going to tell you a little bit about him before we welcome him to the show, but I'm going to veer from our normal course and just kind of set this conversation up a little bit today, because it's an important conversation for all of us to really settle in and listen to and understand, because what Matthew's going to do is he's going to walk us through kind of understanding how to process information and understand why we believe the things that we believe and then what we can do with those beliefs in today's society. So in my humble opinion, we live in wildly divisive times inside of an era of an algorithm-fueled enragement engagement cycle where kind of the connective best potential of the internet and our common interest has, in my opinion, devolved into some kind of a hate-filled shouting chamber. I think about this every day in everything that I do and everyone that I talk with. And so I've been wildly curious about how we can more entrepreneurially or innovatively, differently, thoughtfully think about how we got here and how we get to a better version of ourselves again at some point in our future. And as such, I've been really eager and I am very grateful to have the opportunity to have this conversation today with Matthew. So let me tell you about Matthew first. Matthew has one foot in neuroscience, another in sociology, and both eyes laser focused on how misinformation shapes our world. He's a social scientist who's not afraid to step out of academia and into our daily discourse, your news columns, and even your thought bubbles. He's an interdisciplinary social scientist with a background in neuroscience and psychology and holds a PhD in sociology. He's worked and studied at the University of Notre Dame, shout out, go Irish, Vanderbilt University, and the University of South Carolina. His research focuses on media literacy, misinformation, social networks, political polarization, identities, and artificial intelligence, and its impact on all of the above. He is a regular contributor to various media outlets and national conferences and hosts himself the podcast Misguided, the podcast, and authored his recently similarly named book, Misguided, Where Misinformation Starts, How It Spreads, and What to Do About It, where he helps us explore how social and psychological forces shape the way that we process and consume information, like he's going to do with us today. So from brain scans to social networks, from data to dialogue, he's asking the big questions like, why do we believe what we believe, and how does that belief spread? So it's a great pleasure. Matthew, welcome to Entrepreneurial Thinkers. I'm really grateful to have you today, buddy.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob. It's great to be here.
We've got a lot to talk about. It's obviously, as we framed it up already, some might say it heavy, some might say it important subject for us to unpack, which we're going to do. But I want to start out with a kind of a simpler question that was bubbling around as I was putting the show together. Maybe a little fun, maybe a little light, maybe a little serious. Why do we hate our neighbors' flags and hats and bumper stickers so much?
Yeah. Well, when I think of that question, I think about how we all want to belong to different communities and connect with other people. We're fundamentally social creatures. And when we see bumper stickers or flags or any sort of external stimuli that makes us think that we don't belong to that particular group, it can make us feel very upset. It can make us feel out of place. It can make us feel disconnected. And I think that explains a lot of how we navigate our social worlds and how we navigate our interactions with other people is we are, especially now, as I'm sure we'll get to with the way our digital ecosystem is set up, we're constantly being reminded of which groups we belong to and which groups we don't belong to. So when we see these flags or bumper stickers or any sort of, again, some type of stimuli in our minds that kind of activates this identities that we belong to and those also that we don't belong to.
So I teased it in your intro bio right there at the end, and I want to turn that kind of last statement into a question that you can then run with in every direction you'd like to. Fundamentally, why do we believe what we believe? And then how does that belief spread?
Yeah. So from my perspective as a social scientist, as a social psychologist, I think a lot about the identities that we have and how we think about identities in the social sciences is just defining it as a set of meanings. So you have this set of meanings and values that you want to adhere to. And the reason that you want to adhere to these sets of meanings and values is because they provide us with a source of self-esteem. They help us navigate our social worlds. They help reduce uncertainty and anxiety as we navigate this complex social world. So in many ways, it's positive or even neutral. Like you can think about being a parent, like you want to take care of your children's. That's a role of being a parent, is taking care of your kids. If you're a student, you want to study, you want to show up to class, you want to get good grades, and that makes you feel good when you do so. So a lot of times these identity processes can be positive. They reinforce behaviors that are helpful in many ways. The challenging part is whenever we have these very strong identities that are clashing with the best available evidence, because our identities are telling us to support our identity so much in the face of this overwhelming evidence that may not be consistent with, again, the best available evidence or what we know or our best understanding of truth. The classic example of this, and one of the most studied examples of this, especially in the United States, is political identities. So that's why I often use political identities as a case study and as an example, because in the United States, we have this very clear two-party system with this in-group and this out-group, and we're seeing growing political polarization over the years. So it's funny that I have studied political polarization and politics for a while now, because I was never really interested in politics at the beginning of all of this. I was more interested in belief systems way back when I started getting interested in psychology and neuroscience and all of those things. But for a variety of reasons, I think it's important to study how people process their information environments through the lens of a political identity. So again, because these identities have such influence over how we process information and how we're motivated to maintain consistency between the values and meanings of those identities, when people have really strong political identities, they're so motivated to uphold them and also attack their opposing political group that this means that they may fall for information that is not true. So that's kind of the high level summary there.
That last part, right? So I'll say this later, but I'm literally old enough, not just how we like to use that on social media, where we say like, oh, I'm old enough to remember, something from last week. Like I'm actually at 57 old enough to have remembered a lot of stuff about how our political identities and how we attach to them has evolved or devolved, right? In the history of the United States. And that last line there that you say, like, attached to our values or beliefs, like our political identity, and then attack the
hmm
others. Like
hmm
that I'm curious if there's more explanation behind that. Like, has that always been present in the research? And my perception of it is just like anecdotally wrong, or is that kind of a more modern, recent phenomena that it's not just that I have to defend my jersey, but I have to attack the other jersey.
Yes, it's definitely supported with research that we're becoming more polarized, not just ideologically, but emotionally. And how we categorize ourselves has a lot to do with not being on the other side and then also attacking the other side. So it's not just you really identify with your team, it's also you really don't like the other team.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I use sports examples and analogies a lot because I think a lot of it does apply to politics and identities more broadly. So it's not that you really like the Yankees, it's that you also really hate the Boston Red Sox. So it's like we're seeing
Right.
that now that you have both of those working together that just amplifies the strength of this relationship of the identity biasing your beliefs.
Yeah. I was going to ask you that it's kind of maybe now a bit of a follow on to this, right? So, in my opinion or my perspective, it seems like we live in this like hyper tribal partisan era,
hmm
but do we actually live? I mean, like maybe you can expand on what you were just saying there, right? So, what you're saying is we are maybe in a more partisan, or we're becoming more tribalized than we have been. This isn't just like a recency bias because we have more information available to us.
Yeah, there's definitely research to suggest that we've become more polarized over the years. Although I should caveat that with the majority of Americans are still not on the extremes. And in this media
Okay.
environment, in the social media environment, we often see the most extreme takes. So it makes it feel like we're even more polarized than we actually are. Like we are polarized. I don't think you should, or anyone should, pretend that it's not that big of a deal or it's not as extreme as it really is. Just because there are a lot of people who are in this like exhausted majority or how it's been categorized different ways. There's a lot of people who are not left wing or right wing on those like extreme poles of the spectrum.
Yeah.
Um, but that said, overall, when we look at the aggregate of the data, we're trending on this timeline of we're seeing more polarization, more people strongly identifying with their partisan identity, more people feeling great dislike for the opposing partisan identity. So we're seeing this trend. But I like the caveat that with also saying it's not everyone who's going this direction. It's just
Yeah.
on a societal level, we're seeing this trend.
Sure. No, and to use your sports analogy, because I do that as well, former athlete, former coach, like, and also just person who grew up in Chicago, which means you're born with sports in your blood, right? Like, I mean, I could say back in the day, I would have said like, yes, I'm a Cubs fan. I despise the White Sox but I
hmm
grew up around lots of White Sox fans,
Right.
right? Like I had White Sox fans in my family. I mean, I didn't wish that they got picked up by masked agents and thrown in vans and disappeared, right? I
hmm
didn't wish that they'd be eradicated from the planet Earth. I grew up a Notre Dame football fan. I moved to Los Angeles. I am surrounded by USC people for the first couple of years. Like I would joke that I can't be friends with any USC people, but obviously I'm friends with lots of USC people, right?
Yeah.
And we can coexist in a world in which we then a couple times a year share like a healthy, rivalry-ish disdain for each other over something that is again light in its fare, so a sporting event, right?
Yeah.
But now it does seem like it is much more like, no, if you're a fan of this, like I literally wish you didn't exist.
Yeah. And the comment that you alluded to there about like knowing people who are White Sox fans, I think is really important. And it's something, also for me, being a sports fan and an academic, I found interesting is like, there's these sports rivalries at colleges. We really hate this opposing college. And for me, I went to,
Clemson in South Carolina, right?
yeah, I went to these bigger research schools in my graduate and postgraduate work, but I went to a tiny liberal arts college for undergrad where we didn't really have like sports that, I don't want to say, we didn't have like the institutions and the big fandoms that are associated. Like
Yeah.
people cared about the sports teams, but it was Division 3. Everything was very small and it wasn't as extreme. So then for me, it was kind of interesting because like as an academic, I knew lots of people at lots of different universities. So I never felt like any sort of rivalry because like we're all kind of colleagues.
Yeah.
So it was just kind of interesting to see like, Notre Dame and Ohio State and like these different rivalries like that, where or I guess Michigan and Ohio State was a big one that I saw.
And basically Notre Dame and just about anybody you
Yeah,
could
that's
pick, right?
true. Yeah. And then also, when I went to Notre Dame and I was like, I don't know, it's like, that's a whole like meta discussion of identity of me working at Notre Dame being like, yeah, I really like the computer science department. But then also like, when I say I'm at Notre Dame, people get the response like, "Oh, I hate Notre Dame."
No,
it's like, why do you hate this professor I work with? Like, you don't even know him.
Immediately. No, taking it back, and we're not only going to talk about politics today because fundamental to your work and the research that you've published, and also just to the things that I see that you share in your newsletter and on your own podcast, like this is a misinformation across a whole bunch of spectrums that is really dangerous to us, and we're going to get into a lot of that. To pull it back out, kind of maybe think historically a little bit, right? I always say in anything in life, but I'm a bit of a history nerd. I apply that as a context or a lens through which I talk about business or entrepreneurship, just about anything, right? And I always say this following thing, and so I'd love for you to help us understand this in this context, right? Like, we have to understand how we got here before we can figure out how we're going to get to someplace better, right? Wherever that someplace better might be and however long it might take, that's kind of secondary. First, we got to understand like how we got here. So in this context of this devolution, this tribalism, this increased partisanship over a number of issues, not just our politics, like what is your research? What has your study and your gut tell you is like how we got here?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of factors. The media environment changing over time has certainly played a large role with just how media companies get money, advertising, and trying to get people hooked to watching cable news or their radio show. It used to be, way back when there wasn't that many channels on your television, and you didn't have to worry about standing out and like leaning into your niche audience to gain money that way. And now that's like the best way to make money as a media company or as a media personality. You find your audience and you just lean into amplifying these flames of identity and polarization. And it's okay if you upset half the country because that other half of the country is really on your side. And in fact, the controversy that comes up by upsetting people can actually be profitable in this attention economy where more people clicking on your stuff can equal greater revenue streams. So for me, I think a lot of the economic incentives has changed, and also how that has connected to social media as well, where again, we have this incentive structure of outrage can be very profitable, and there's this motivation to seek that out. And we're seeing the rhetoric of politicians change over time. Again, this started, even in the 90s, there was this more inflammatory language that was happening. So there's a variety of factors that go into this. Then there's like big picture structural issues with rising inequality, economic inequality makes people upset. So you just have this like background of angst that people are going to be searching for this outlet that matches the outrage. And then there's this outrage machine that is very profitable. So again, it's hard to pinpoint like one specific thing. But it's just like culturally and structurally, we're seeing all of these forces reward outrage and the narrowing of identities. And then another big thing that I think is really important is we're becoming more and more isolated as well and more fractured. So it's easy to find people who agree with you on the internet, but we're not always incentivized or not often incentivized to seek out people who you don't agree with or you don't have a lot in common with.
Right.
And we are having less opportunities to meet lots of people from diverse backgrounds. So it's challenging to meet people with different identities, to meet the White Sox fan, for example,
Right.
just meeting like people who think differently than you. And then the only exposure you have to people who think differently than you is some extreme caricature of what you see on social media. And then you're like, oh, well, that group of people must think like this. So all those factors I think about really contribute to this very inflammatory time we see ourselves in today.
We've alluded to this already a few times, right? It isn't just politics. And so I'm curious, like your perspective, right? To me, it seems like we've partisanized ourselves off into such far extreme corners that we don't even share like a basic set of beliefs around civics or science or people, like it, like we can't agree on it. Like I at least grew up in a world, as you said, 3 channels, right? Three TV networks, so to speak. And what I would arguably say, and this isn't to just sound all boomerish, right? But like there were a basic set of truths or facts or history that generally everybody agreed on, no matter whether you might have believed you would have liked it to have been different, right? We could agree that these things, and today, and again, this is a lot of me leaning in as the, hi, I'm just the curious average Joe, and you're the expert researcher over here and communicator on this topic. Like, it seems like we've broken apart from each other across almost everything. Like, is that just me reactionary, my feelings, or is that actually what you're seeing? Like, we are quickly lacking agreement over basic facts and truths.
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Chisos Capital. Everyone knows that raising capital is hard. And frankly, finding the next pool of entrepreneurs to get access to as limited investors is sometimes impossible too. Do you have a big idea, a dream you're building, but you're struggling to find early funding? Well, Chisos is changing the game for founders, creators, athletes, and investors. Whether you're launching a startup, growing your creative brand, or training for the big leagues, Chisos backs you. Chisos uniquely invests up to $100,000 in people, not just products, whether they be entrepreneurs, creators, or even athletes. With their unique CISA model, convertible income share agreements, founders get flexible funding without giving up equity or ownership, and investors get attractive returns and great upside with less risk. Chisos works for both investors and the people bringing our world to life. If you're seeking access to a truly diverse pool of deals, or you're someone who feels overlooked by the VC game, Chisos is ready to back you. So apply now at chisos.io.
Yeah, there's definitely evidence to support that, unfortunately. Again, it's so easy to find information that confirms your priors that you can live in a very different reality, and the hyper personalization to which that happens is something that concerns me. So with social media, we have these algorithms where you click on stuff that you like and you see more of that particular type of stuff. Now with AI, it takes it up another step. It's like, okay, you're going to give you hyper personalized stuff, and now you can create the types of fictions that you want to see very easily. You just type in a prompt, make this video of whatever I want to see, and you can see that. And I worry that we're going to be more and more fractured, and we're just going to be stuck in these loops of whatever our pre-existing disposition or beliefs were. We can seek that out online and continue to be stuck in this loop of verifying those narrow sets of identities and the meanings associated with them. So I do think it is worse in many ways. I mean, there's always been issues with false information, with people, believing things that are not true, people trying to take advantage of that. I just think the scale and the volume is definitely different in the last even 10 years, 15 years. It's much different because, for me, I also feel like a boomer sometimes when I talk about the early days of the internet and how, like, I really liked the internet in around 2005. Like you had MySpace, you had AOL Instant Messenger.
Yep.
And it was a lot more.
I'll take you back. I'll validate you, Matthew. I'll take you back 10 years before that, like the birth of the internet. And it was, as I alluded to in the opening, right? It was, at least in the beginning, and it had the potential to be longer, but it was this connective tool.
Yeah. Yeah, it seemed like you really spent more time connecting with your friends and like immediate contacts and immediate social interactions. And it's interesting, there's actually a survey that just came out. I forget off the top of my head what survey, who funded it, but basically they found that in the last 10 years, there's been this decrease of using social media to connect with your friends. And now a lot more people use social media for news and entertainment, but actually the original design of connecting it with your friends and family, people don't use it for that as much. And I just find that so interesting that we're seeing this platform and these companies that are supposedly designed to connect us. They're actually doing the opposite in many ways, keeping us angry and divided. And it's not to
Yeah.
say that people still don't use them to connect to lots of different groups. Like there still are
Hey,
positives.
I
Like
found you, right?
right,
We found, right, in
exactly.
that sense.
Yeah, like I've definitely had lots of positive encounters with social media and connecting with people, like-minded people, and it's been great in many ways. But again, it's difficult to tease out those like unique cases, but also
Yeah.
like looking at the societal level, what's this actually doing for shaping how people interact and how they perceive other people? Um, so it seems like we're trending in the wrong direction. I mean,
Yeah, sure
at the
does.
very least, the most charitable thing I could say about social media is that it's not helping us become more social.
No, right. Ironically, it's the worst name. I mean, now for its present utilization, it's the worst named tool ever.
Yeah.
It's funny. I was thinking about this. A friend was sending me an invitation for Thanksgiving this morning, and that was it's on my mind. And you with what something you said a moment ago made me think of that example. Like, right, we again 20-25 years ago. You're younger than I am, but you are a Midwesterner, so we share a similar set of beliefs, probably. But like 20-25 years ago, you'd go to Thanksgiving and you're like, there was the crazy uncle, right? Or the
Hmm.
cousin who was the tin hat conspiracy theorist who believed all that stuff, right? And that was like acceptable. Like you knew
Hmm.
that, right? You knew that that was going to be the case. And he or she, maybe it wasn't an uncle, maybe it was an aunt, right? Would spew off
Hmm.
a bunch of nonsense after they had a couple too many cocktails. And
Yeah.
everybody would just kind of go like, oh, okay, right? And just like leave them over in the corner. But you didn't like excise them from the family. And you also didn't put a whole lot of stock into what they believed because they were this outlier.
Right.
And that seems to have gone from that to, as you said, very precipitously in this last 10, 15, 20 years to, now it's like you're curating the guest list to your Thanksgiving because there's all those people that wear the other hats that you don't want to have come to your party because then your party won't be any fun and no one will talk about anything. It used to
Hmm.
be, I grew up again, 57, raised in the Midwest. You grew up in the old axioms of like, don't talk politics, don't talk religion,
Hmm.
don't do business with your friends or family, right? And it was like, okay, like if like we're in a world now where it's like, don't talk about anything of any importance. Don't talk about the weather because if you're talking about the weather, you're really talking about climate, and you can't talk
Yeah.
about climate, right? And so and to validate kind of your point, like we've gone from okay. Yes, there are people that have different beliefs or voted for some other opposing candidate to now we literally just homogenize our little circles because we're afraid of like if the circle is wider,
Hmm.
it could be the whole thing could blow up, right? And that's really sad.
It is really sad. I mean, it's a really difficult situation because people are in spaces now where they have to make that decision of like, do they want to try and maintain these relationships? Is it worth the struggle? Especially if they belong to a certain group where their rights are being debated in a political sphere, they may not want to maintain that
Right.
relationship. There's all sorts of factors. And, like to your point about like the uncle or the aunt spouting off these unhinged conspiracy theories, it's not just now that's platformed, it's like incentivized in many ways. It's
Right.
like you get a lot more clicks by spouting off unhinged things on the internet than you do nuanced, measured takes on
and
things.
and now that
Yeah.
crazy uncle shows up to Thanksgiving, and when you say that's nuts, like you're crazy, like stop that, they shoot back with, "Well, no, that you're wrong. I'm right because my 10,000 followers on such and such a platform all agree with me. Like, so
Yeah.
obviously I must be right." You're like, dude, like what? It's that phrase that we hear a lot of, or at least maybe I say it a lot, right? Is this idea of, you can have your own opinions. Everybody has a right to their own opinions, but we don't all have a right to our own facts.
Right.
And
Yeah,
that
no,
seems
it's very appropriate. I think that's a very good line, and it's challenging because to understand even what a fact is can be kind of confusing because a lot of times there's these debates about science, and science is this method of understanding what's true, and it's always evolving. And I think that evolving self-corrective process has been hijacked in many ways by people who willfully or unintentionally like misunderstand the process, that like just because science doesn't have 100% certainty on something, it doesn't mean that it's untrue or lying. So there's a whole other issue of the scientific process and how people can exploit that uncertainty for their own
Yeah.
ends.
Yeah, which again is incentivized by these systems
Right.
that we live inside of. Because let's just say you and I met 25 years ago, right? I might not agree with the conclusion that you come to as a result of your scientific research,
Mhm.
but I'm going to defer to you and go, but yeah, but he's the expert, like he's the researcher, and I would have default trusted the work that you've done, the rigor that you put yourself through, the accreditations that you've achieved, et cetera, right? I would now, like, there's no room to appreciate that anymore. And it's like, again, everybody has like, Matthew Facciani thinks that. Well, I think differently. And myself and Matthew Facciani are exactly equal peers. It's like, no, you're not. Not when it comes to the subjects that Matthew Facciani has dedicated his entire life to focusing on. Like, he's literally put in the proverbial 10,000 hours or more to, like, like, we have to have space for those. Not just you. This isn't to just self-aggrandize, but like just the thesis that we have to have space for people to be expert at things and the rest of us not expert at things. And we've lost a sensibility about that, it seems.
Yeah, it's. I mean, there's been many examples of like, well, like with anything else, like with a mechanic. If you don't understand cars, then you're going to default to the mechanic, and I think a lot of this stems from the institutions themselves, and a lot of these like knowledge creating institutions have not really adapted quickly enough to the evolving digital ecosystem, so they don't communicate very well. And in this era of decentralized communication, democratized communication, where it's really easy to just make a social media platform or account on a platform and say whatever you want and get a big following. What that means is that you have to keep up with that competition. So instead of just the historical, we are belonging to this institution, so we're just going to post something on our website, and that's the fact, and we're just going to hope everyone trusts it. That doesn't work anymore. Like you're competing with this space of people having intimate connections with influencers or lots of different people who are saying, hey, I'm going to answer your questions directly, on TikTok or Instagram, and like respond to you and have that relationship. And we know that trustworthiness is often dependent, or at least a big factor of trustworthiness is that personal relationship you have with someone. So it's not enough to just be like, I'm a scientist, I've studied this for 10,000 hours or years. Maybe not years, but
it feels
like years sometimes.
Yeah, exactly right.
But you have to you have to show your work and show why you're trustworthy and develop that relationship with the person that you're communicating with and meet them where they are. So this very top-down way of communication that institutions have previously relied on is no longer applicable in today's environment.
Yeah, not enough. You wrote something recently. You said, I was really struck by this statement. Thinking critically matters, but in today's attention economy, knowing what to ignore may matter even more. Right. So help us. I think it's a perfectly timed segue here. Help us understand how we can become better critical ignorers of things, and not just critical thinkers in this rapidly changing landscape of tools and platforms and information. Like, help us figure out how, because it feels to me like one of the gifts we could leave our audience today is some lessons. We'll get to some specific takeaways at the end, but like just some general themes on like how to become more skilled at navigating this world that we just spent a little bit of time describing. So how do we become better critical ignorers, not just critical thinkers?
Yeah, I really like the term critical ignoring. It's a more recent term in the media literacy, education, psychology literature. And it basically adds to this idea of navigating our information environments more critically. So a lot of that has been on the critical thinking front, which is the ability to analyze information itself. But this takes it in a different direction because you are trying to work on protecting your attention as best you can and selectively ignoring all that noise, because this environment is just overwhelming with the sheer volume of information. So there's a few strategies that some of these researchers have talked about that can help. And a couple of them are pretty straightforward, but also really important. The first one is to just think about your own activity online and consider if you can basically like nudging yourself to limit the amount of time you spend on these platforms.
Okay.
So it's not just limiting it with like a timer on Instagram or something like that, although those could be really useful. I think it's important to also reflect on how these systems and people on these platforms are motivated to try to take your attention and process that when you're using these platforms. So, a term that I also really like is this idea of a conflict entrepreneur. So people who make money by spreading conflict and outrage.
I don't think I've heard that, and I love it though. That like you just lit up parts of my brain. I was like, that's exactly what these guys are.
Yeah. So it's appropriate to your show as well, with the entrepreneurial connection there, because
I'm like the opposite. I'm the kryptonite to conflict entrepreneurs.
Yeah,
At least I'm trying to be.
No, absolutely. So I think it's important to be aware of that framework, though, is my point, is like understanding that there are people like that, where they have this goal and framework and process that involves creating revenue by spreading outrage and conflict. So when you log on, you'd be like, oh, like there's a lot of people trying to do this. And just broadly, we know that these algorithms reward sensationalist behavior, sensationalist attacks, misleading information, emotive information. So trying to just really reflect on that and be like, what do I want to get out of spending time online? Like, is there any advantage for me to doom scroll for an hour today? Like, how am I going to feel after I doom scroll? Like, am I going to feel better? Even if it's stuff I'm consuming that's like attacking the out group. It's like, okay, I'm reading all this stuff that I'm attacking the out group. It's like, yeah, I get my dopamine hit. I attack this group I don't like. But then try to reflect on like, how do you feel at the end of that? Like, are you really feeling more fulfilled? Would you have rather spent time doing literally anything else?
And I was just gonna say literally anything.
But just like any hobby you enjoy, like going outside,
could you have gone for a walk and could you have done something else and gotten a dopamine hit?
Yeah. So it's like, it's that immediate, like these platforms are designed for that immediate hit that just kind of keeps us like a rat in a cage, like pressing a lever, which is not great for our mental health and our mental well-being. But we can still feel trapped in it because it's so easy. It's so easy to pull on Instagram and immediately see, this is content I like. It's, attacking an outgroup or whatever it's doing. It's keeping me on looking at this rectangle in my hand. Whereas I don't think most people are going to feel as fulfilled looking at this rectangle in their hand compared to doing just basically anything else.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it, is like understanding that and reflecting on avoiding the amount of time you spend on these things. So it doesn't have to be like you completely delete all these apps. It's just being mindful of it.
That's huge. But I mean, it sounds so simple, yet it's so important, right?
Right.
Like, and it's so infrequently done by people. It'd be like the equivalency of, like, hey, you want to be healthier and lose weight, like eat better, right? It's super simple, but then it's so hard to do it, right? So be mindful of why you're actually opening up this thing instead of being mindless and just opening it up because that's how your hands cramped around that device every day, right?
So I mean, it's very similar to developing any other healthy habit. Like a lot of these things we all know is good for us or bad for us, like eating healthy, working out. We all know that's how you improve your odds of being healthier and avoiding diseases. But then it's like, okay, practically, what does that look like?
Right.
And like I mentioned before, you can set timers on your phone. You can use apps to, monitor your activity. It really helps to have accountability with another person. Just like working out, you're much more likely to maintain healthy habits if you have one partner that does it with you. So try to find a friend that's like, hey, we both use our phones a lot. We're going to try to keep each other accountable. And then boom, you're automatically going to decrease your screen time.
I love that. I love that. I love the broad concept of that phrase that you use, this critical ignorers, right? So here are some tools that we can take into our use of these things that we're so addicted to, right? That helps. Okay, we're not going to tell you like, stop using them, delete them all. Like, don't use your phone. That would be nonsense in a digitized 2025 world, right? But if what you're saying is, hey, use it, but again, be mindful, be thoughtful, be purposeful, have some intention about why you're using it. And even if you are allowing yourself like that you could equivocate it to, I'm just going to turn on something on TV and just veg out, as we used to say, right? Like, okay, so cool. You give yourself 30 minutes to just veg out. But if you physically start not feeling well, right, in reaction, in your emotions, in your blood pressure, your heart rate, whatever, like that's the world telling you this is not good for you right now.
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at Shore Capital. In today's venture capital world, it's not just about cash. It's about relationships. Capital is harder to find, limited investors have fewer managers that they can trust, and the industry is just filled with far too much hype. Shore Capital is an early-stage venture fund investing in the world's most ruthlessly iterative founders, helping its limited partners to find founders who are solving the world's most dynamic problems, teams that excel in mastering the idea maze, teams moving with a rapid, iterative velocity and demonstrating radical resourcefulness. Shore Capital doesn't just write checks, though. They become fractional co-founders when needed, offering strategic support, high-leverage relationship development, and a deep commitment to the long-term success of their portfolio companies. If you are a ruthlessly iterative founder with a bold vision or a limited investor seeking sustained access to the brightest big thinkers of our time, Shore Capital wants to meet you. So visit shorecapital.notion.site to learn more.
Yeah, I think, that's the feeling is a big aspect of it. Like, if you're seeing something that creates a lot of emotion in you, that's the indicator of itself to pause and reflect on, am I sharing this because, one, is it true? Like, so that's another part of this critical ignoring, is this concept of lateral reading, where you look laterally instead of within the content of the article that you're potentially sharing. You're seeing, what do other people say about the author? What do other people say about this topic? You're literally opening another tab and seeing who's this author, what's their background, who's funding them. And again, it just slows you down. Like, a lot of this is just adding friction too. Like,
and what is that called? Lateral reading?
Lateral reading.
I do that like for like the last couple of years, and I did not know that's what it's called. But I like, in my head, I was like, I'm source checking. I'm contextualizing that thing that I just read to, as you say, first and foremost, make sure that it's true, and then understand of where it came from. Right? Why was and if it's the only example, like if it's the only story about this one thing that supposedly happened, and there's no other source information on the entirety of the internet, like that's a good sign that it either could be completely untrue or that person is hijacking someone else's point about something.
Right. Exactly.
Fascinating. Wow.
Yes.
Okay, so a little bit more personal. Next couple of questions. Like, you've studied everything from neuroscience to social networks and everything in between. You said, like, as you said, when you started, you didn't start with a passion about political partisanship per se, right? It was more about belief systems, which I can imagine encompass everything, like religion and our where we come from, the weather, all this stuff. So, like, at what point was it that you started to realize that this misinformation topic or theme was something that you were so passionate about?
Yeah, a lot of that happened in the middle of graduate school when I was learning more about the political system and seeing how science was discussed in the political system, the misunderstanding of science, and, just, it was kind of forced onto me with many people talking about fake news being this political name now. Like, it wasn't always that way. Misinformation used to be this niche psychological term about, like, false memories and false beliefs. So really, it was kind of like it connected with the moment of people talking about false information in politics and how it's connected to political misinformation as it's being understood. But my broad background and broad interest is, how do people form beliefs? And that just connects so well to this misinformation topic in research. So I've just always been interested in how people believe things that are, two people can believe something very differently when exposed to the same facts. For example, And this stems from like very early social psychology research with conformity studies, where you might be familiar with this Solomon Asch conformity study with like the 3 lines. So it's this very simple study where the participant goes into a room, they see 3 lines up on the wall of different lengths, and then they see a 4th line, and they say, okay, which of that 4th line length does it match one of the other 3 lines? And it's really, really easy because like one line is clearly the same length as the other.
As the 4th one. Okay.
And like most people get this right. It's something like 95% of the time, the accuracy score is about 95%. That's when you're by yourself. When someone in front of you purposely gives the wrong answer, then your accuracy score plummets because you're more likely to conform to what they just said. Oh. So you're trying to justify. You're like, well, those 2 lines look like they're close, but hey, that other person gave the wrong answer. So maybe they're seeing something I don't see. And especially if multiple people in front of you, like 5 people in front of you, all say it's line B, even though you think line C is a little bit more clear, you're still going to go with line B because 5 people in front of you just gave the wrong answer in a row. So that kind of stuff to me was always fascinating. And it just mapped on so well to this academic study of what's called misinformation studies, of just, 2 people believing something very different based on some type of social factor. In particular, the social factor I've been looking at is identity and network structure. But it's still just this social force that guides people to interpret information very differently, even though sometimes it can be something that has a more objective answer, like that line study.
Yeah. Wow. That's amazing. And so it's just so important in today's world. It's unfortunate that our federal government has decided that we shouldn't fund people like you, because clearly we need more people like you. We're this deep into this. I think it's an important kind of, let's set aside a little bit of an explainer for folks, right? There's a ton of words that get tossed around in just the media landscape and in our social discourse nowadays. And so let's make sure we help people understand misinformation and then disinformation, because in my experience, these seem to get attached to each other quite a bit. They do. And they just kind of rolled out in like one sentence of bad stuff, right? And I think it's important. Maybe you could help us delineate between the two and why they're both not good.
Sure. So misinformation is a broad umbrella term simply referring to false or misleading information. It's, like I said, it was popularized in the psychology literature in like the 80s with like false memories, for example. And now it's used so much and it's polarized in so many ways that I often find it unproductive. In fact, I'm actually working on an article for my Substack about why I don't like using the word misinformation, especially in like everyday conversations. If I'm just meeting someone and I'm describing what I do, for example, I don't really like saying that I study misinformation, even, for a variety of reasons.
I love it. You're a true entrepreneurial thinker right there,
right? Yeah, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. My own entrepreneurial process of being in academia and then having my funding eliminated and then, having to pivot immediately to an online persona and podcaster and Substack writer,
author,
and all that stuff.
Substack, all this stuff, community builder. Although interesting, you just made me think of something I didn't think about prior to this. So let's assume a world at some point in the near future, right, when a different federal government decides to refund the people that are important like you. And now you have this opportunity to go back and build your career inside of academia, but you are now this person, right? You are now this, like, I part of me would assume, but I could be totally wrong. Like, you could then effectively be both. Like, you could do both together. Whereas maybe had the world stayed the same, you never would have wound up in this arena that you're in now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a silver lining. And I would even go a step further in saying that this current landscape provides an opportunity for academics to reach out and have different opportunities that they wouldn't otherwise pursue, because, like I mentioned before, institutions have been so slow to change and adapt their communication styles, and we haven't rewarded science communicators in the academy really ever. At least in modern times, as long as I've been around, it hasn't been a thing. Like, it's almost like you're disincentivized for speaking publicly about your knowledge and what you're studying. So now it's like we can rebuild these institutions and make them better. Like, that's the pie in the sky, like, positive, optimistic take is like, okay, we're forced to reckon with this old style wasn't working, because it wasn't working. Like, we were drifting towards a lack of distrust, a lack of people following and listening to academics and physicians, scientists. So now it's like, okay, well, those scientists and physicians have an opportunity here to adapt and work within the modern communication infrastructure.
Yeah.
So you don't even have to have like a huge audience. You can just use social media and try to connect with your local audience and your local networks.
No,
So
very
I
true.
would do both. And I think a lot of other people have been doing both now and have been really effective at it. So yeah, that's how I would envision it, is like, we're basically updating. We're forced to update because of, reasons that we may not have liked, but now it's here.
Yeah.
And now hopefully we can have that built into our infrastructure and how we navigate our roles as academics moving forward, where it's much more accepted, much more rewarded doing this type of work.
No, I love it. I pulled us off into a tangent there, which is my host privilege. So let's finish the prior question.
Sure.
Disinformation comparatively is what?
It's a purposeful intent to mislead. So it has the intentionality aspect. So someone who has a political agenda, a financial agenda, some type of agenda saying, hey, if I get this person to believe a falsehood, it will be better for me. That's why I'm doing it. And that's tricky because you don't always know people's intent, right? So that's why I don't often use the word disinformation a whole lot. Just speaking broadly, I often use misinformation. I think it's just easier. But like I mentioned before, even misinformation is something I'm trying to not use as much in these types of conversations. But, since we're diving into the nuances of academic research in information science, that's why I'm talking about misinformation in this context.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's important to delineate between the intentionality between the two terms.
You mentioned something in the very beginning when we were talking about kind of our jerseys and hats and tribalism and whatnot. And I think it was fear. I think you said, and this is me paraphrasing, I may be completely wrong, but I think it was something along the lines of like fear of being left out or fear of not being part of that group. Of right now, kind of the triggers that set people off in either pursuit of or belief of misinformation, right? What are the drivers? Is it fear? Is it identity? Like, I just so strongly identify with this thing and therefore I'll believe anything that comes along with that. Is it ego? Again, I don't want to be wrong. So I'm, even if I know the lines are obviously A and C are the lines that are matched, I'm going to say B because I like my ego is fragile. Like, are they all of those things that are made a cocktail of our own insecurities that are then leaving us vulnerable to this? Or do one of these personality attributes kind of rise above the rest?
Yeah, I think it's all of them. The amount to which one has a greater degree of predictive power is difficult because it's also contextual on like what, in maybe one instance, your identity might matter more. Maybe another instance, fear of being left out or being afraid or wanting to conform with other people may matter more. I mean, I think identity explains a lot. That's why I talk about it a lot. That's my own bias, is I think identity is really important and impactful. And also learning how your identities exist within other identities is another important. It's not just, okay, you have this identity, it's important, it biases you. Another thing I look at is how the identity is reinforced by other people in your network. Are you surrounding yourself with just one person that thinks differently than you? My research has found that just knowing one person in your personal network who has different political background than yourself significantly reduces susceptibility to misinformation, political bias.
Interesting.
And then even beyond that, when we think about our identities, are they distinct from one another, or are they reinforcing each other? So if we have a political identity and a religious identity, are they overlapping in their meanings? And is that creating more of a reinforcement effect, like this multiplier effect? Versus, okay, we have a political identity, we have a religious identity, but they're not always overlapping. They're not always the same people. They're not always, sometimes there's conflict between them and we have to grapple with that. And that broadens how we see ourselves. So we're not so dependent on maintaining this narrow set of meanings. Like the most extreme example is we only have a handful of identities that we care about and they all agree with each other. What that means is if anytime we're exposed to information that challenges those narrow set of meanings associated with those identities, our entire sense of self is attacked. So we're very much motivated to not process that objectively. Conversely, if we have lots of different identities that have lots of different meanings and are not overlapping with each other so much, it means we can better handle any sort of criticism or conflicting information or challenging information to one identity, because we have this broad reservoir of self-esteem that we can use for how we see ourselves. And we can always say like, okay, this is attacking, one piece of me, but it's not all of me. So I can handle this. I can process this. And I think that's really
funny.
important too, is to consider how our identities are structured and how our identities overlap with other identities.
Man, that is so insightful. I'm listening to you and I'm thinking about how I, over the years, like over the course of my long life now, have described myself. And for a long portion of my life, both when I was growing up living in Chicago and then almost as an easy identifier, like almost like a badge that I could easily describe to people for decades after I left Chicago, I would simply describe myself, and this is a very common thing of people of my era growing up the way I did. I would literally have introduced myself to people for probably into my late 30s, early 40s as an Irish Catholic kid from Chicago. And like,
Yeah.
if you're an identity person like yourself, like a studier of identities, right? Like I just said a whole bunch about myself in that little condensed phrase. And to a whole portion of the world, probably my peer group age-wise, like from other places, other parts of the US, like that was he just told me a whole bunch about himself. But what's fascinating is I'm listening to you describe how we use identity in maybe a more present day sense. Like when I would say that, I never thought emotionally about it being something that was going to separate me from others or project my beliefs upon others, like competitively. I might be totally mangling how to describe this, but it's like real-time reaction to your outline there. Like I literally thought I was being helpful to people. Like there was a bit of pride, like personal pride in like, this is where I'm from, this is who I am, this is what I believe. But it was also like hey, here's a quick shorthand to like, if you get it, I'm going to help you understand me a lot We're going to skip like 2 or 3 dates or 2 or 3 meetings or whatever conversations, right? Because I'm going to say, and another one, this is very personal. People on this show have heard me use this one before. You may appreciate this being in Milwaukee. Like I always say, when you run into somebody from Chicago, I don't care what age you are, when you run into somebody from Chicago in another part of the world where you are, which happens quite a bit here in Los Angeles, I'll just say, like, what high school did you go to? And that's a very unique Midwestern or maybe big city thing. Like, because if you tell me you went to a certain high school, you've just told me like 60% about yourself. Right. Because that tells me socioeconomic stuff. It tells me maybe religious stuff. It tells me neighborhood context. It tells me probably ethnic context. If you tell me like when you went, like all of a sudden then there's shared experiences, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I never really thought about it until now listening to you. I'm glad I've met you, right? Like that, like to process, intellectualize the identity tools that even I'd used, that I didn't think about them that way. So that's super insightful. Thank you for that insights.
Yeah, I'm glad I could help. And I mean, identities do help us connect with lots of people. Like that's why, again, like one of the big positives of it is just it can create issues again when we're so focused on that narrow set of identities to the point where we're not able to connect with other people that think differently than us, or we don't want to. And we constantly view ourselves in this narrower and narrower lens of meanings and values. And those meanings and values are just the only way we can navigate our social environments. That's really when it causes a lot of issues. So, just being mindful of like, okay, this is how I'm identifying myself. Like, that's great. That's good. And also think, okay, am I, reinforcing a narrow set of identities? And is this creating potential bias for how I might interact with other people?
Right. And the old adage, right, of like we age and we solidify or even codify our for those watching on the YouTube, I'm scrunching my fist right now in this like cathartic way, right? Like it becomes codified in who we are as we get older. right? And we
Yeah.
become more and more of what we are. My daughter loves to teach. I have a 32 now year old daughter here in Southern California, and she often teases me that I'm the only person in her life that she's ever known that Benjamin buttoned his political beliefs. And when she says that, I literally went from like the first election I was able to vote in when I was 18 years old. I voted for President Bush for the first.
Hmm.
Like President H.W., the first one, the old man, the father. And today, like if he was running for office, I'd vote for Bernie, right? Or I will vote for AOC or what. She's like, you were like this weird 20-something-year-old conservative, right? Who had his belief systems, right? Who then has become like the most progressive late 50-something-year-old liberal person you could possibly ever be. And I'm like, yeah, but that's because I went out into the real world, and the real world taught me like that there was a broader, wider array of belief systems and identities and possibilities available to think
Hmm.
about and consider. And that leads me, it's personal privilege here to be able to tell these little random stories about myself, but it leads me to my next question, which is I often have said it's a lot harder to hate when someone is standing right in front of you,
Yeah.
right, as opposed to this online world. So I want to ask you from a research standpoint, is there a role in which empathy, human empathy, plays a part in us dismantling this kind of echo chamber or ecosystem of misinformation that we live in?
Yeah, I would say it. There's this long research tradition on this idea of intergroup contact, is what it's called. Just, different groups connecting and talking to each other. And the upshot is usually along the lines of if you get different people to be in a room together and have some kind of productive dialogue or accomplish some task together, the animosity they have for each other decreases. So yeah, there's definitely research showing that across a variety of methods and contexts. We've seen this broad finding occur. So then for me, it's like, okay, on a micro level, we know that if you get different people with different backgrounds to talk to each other, it decreases their dislike of each other, and they realize they have much more in common than they thought. So then I'm always thinking like, well, how does that actually happen at scale? Like, okay, it's great that we can see this micro level finding. What structural factors allow for this to happen more broadly? And that's always the more challenging issue. It's like, like there's this discussion of third spaces. Like we have
Right.
our home and work. There's not a lot of like community shared third spaces where you can meet lots of different people.
Not
So you
not as
mentioned,
many
yeah,
anymore as there used to be. And for a
yeah,
lot of the younger
yeah,
generations who've grown up without them or grown up with them being very sparse, they might not even understand the kind of broader context of just my lifetime, just the last 50, 60 years of like third spaces were vital to this
hmm,
interaction with others who think differently than we do.
right. That's what I've been reading about, and this is something that the social scientist Robert Putnam has talked about too. He wrote that book Bowling Alone, and this idea of how we're becoming more isolated, and we have this lack of third spaces and opportunities to connect with other people, and how that broadly has this effect of decreasing trust in each other and institutions and democratic systems. And it makes sense. So if you think about how that works, like if you don't have a lot of opportunities to meet lots of different people, then you're going to think those other people don't have your best interests at heart just because you don't know them. Especially
Right.
again, if you add in the social media outrage machine and all that stuff.
Right.
So yeah,
That's where we slide into this. Like they become them. They become
yeah,
others.
yeah.
We start pointing our fingers at a distance at people that we don't know. And then, as you say, we then lean back into our own fears, our own identities, our own biases, and those feed. And then, God forbid, if we pick up the phone and we start doom scrolling, right? It just feeds that sense of otherism, which is just really dangerous. By the way, it's one of the reasons, and this makes me a total outlier in the context of life in Los Angeles. I intentionally do not have a car and I take public transportation. And one of the reasons I do that, amongst many, is because I literally enjoy putting myself out into the broader world every day.
Yeah.
Right?
That's
I love the
that's cool.
uncertainty of what might come from a random subway or bus trip to go to where I'm going to, where I will then likely be surrounded by a bunch of people who look at the world the way I do and think the way I
Mhm.
do. And I already know that, but the journey there is different than those people who will go to that same event and they will have done it in their single rider vehicle in their
Mhm.
car along the freeway. And then just, right. And again, I'm not self-aggrandizing. It's another example of the lack of third spaces, or how some of our social structures seem like they're set up in cities versus less urbanized areas, more rural areas, et cetera.
We are so grateful to be supported by sponsors like our friends at eSudo. Running any business, but especially a law firm, means balancing a lot. And technology, frankly, shouldn't be a headache. eSudo makes information technology and cybersecurity simple for law firms large or small. With over 20 years of experience, they specialize in everything from Microsoft 365 management to advanced cybersecurity solutions. They help you to stay ahead of threats, manage your data securely, and keep your tech running smoothly so that you can focus on what matters most, your clients. eSudo understands the legal industry's unique needs, offering tailored solutions to ensure that your firm is always in compliance and always protected. Are you ready to upgrade your firm's technology or get help with your questions? Visit esudo.com.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. There's a study that reminds me of just I think it was, most people think they would dislike an interaction with a stranger than they actually would. So they find that whenever they do interact with a stranger, it's actually more pleasant than they expected, which is just kind of interesting, just how we've, over time, we don't interact with people or strangers very often. So it's easy to have this image of, oh, it's not going to be good. But in reality, yeah, we do have a lot more in common with people. People are generally good people and are kind to people.
Yeah.
It's just, we always see a lot of the negative behaviors that are amplified. So
Man,
it's
we
tough.
are our own worst enemy sometimes. All right,
Yeah.
few more questions before we get to our last segment. So
Sure.
I've decided now, listening to you all day, I'm just going to start calling you Bill Nye, the science guy for social sciences.
I appreciate that.
You're the bearded Bill Nye, and that is because like what you've described, and you said it doesn't happen in the social sciences. There hasn't been a Bill Nye, the science guy, emerge the way that he did with Wade. Boy, talk about, now we can look at him and go, wow, he was a really early, right? He was way out in front. He was a frontiersman for doing what you're now suggesting in broader sense should become more the norm for academics, researchers, scientists, experts, etc. So you've researched, podcasted, published a book, writing your Substack newsletter. Of all these mediums that I'm going to say you are using to teach us, because you're teaching. You are as academic, I think, as you probably ever were. You're just utilizing different tools to share that information with the broader public, right? Is there one of them or any of them in particular that feel the most powerful for you when you're discussing these very dense topics?
That's a good question. I guess it depends on how you define power and like what specific context, what specific goal am I trying to reach? Like, in the one hand, so it's funny, first off, that you mentioned Bill Nye Science Guy, because I actually met him 10 years ago now.
Awesome.
And I told him I want to be Bill Nye the Science Guy for the social sciences. So,
dude, there we go. That's awesome. Boom. I'm going to be your hype man. I'm going to try and build this up as best I can.
That's so funny. So yeah, I think I used those words.
That's awesome.
So yeah, it's something I definitely care about and I've thought about for a while. It's just only recently I've been really leaning into it. Like, I've always been on social media. So social media itself is one way that can be really, it can feel powerful or influential or gratifying to share, some niche finding or article and just see like thousands of people actually read it or share it. Like, that's amazing to me, because, academics, usually they have very small audiences. Like, if you're a professor, you might have 30 students, or if you're in a big university, maybe you have 300 students, but then to see like lots of people read it and share it. Again, some nerdy topic that's diving into the nuances of some scientific finding. That's really cool. So I've really enjoyed just social media broadly for that, despite all the negatives. And that's like the challenge of it. It's this great tool to do lots of cool things, but then it also creates problems. So yeah, that's a whole issue.
You've become a good critical ignorer yourself.
Yeah. Well, I think that's why I enjoy social media so much. Like, it's funny, some people will be like, how do you navigate social media? It's like, I really curate my feeds very intentionally. I block a ton of people that are posting outrage, even if they're not interacting with me. If I know that they're an account posting outrage bait, conflict entrepreneur stuff, I just block them because I just want to downrank that in the algorithm. So I'm constantly trying to curate my own algorithmic feed. So yeah, I definitely enjoyed social media. You know, it's been really cool to do my Substack class. That's something that was brand new to me. I did this class on the social psychology of misinformation, and I'd have live Q&As with people. And that was really cool because I'd upload a video, and then people would log on, and I'd do a live stream, and people just ask me questions about it. And that was, it felt like a very dynamic form of teaching. Even more dynamic than when I taught at universities in the formal brick and mortar class. I'm up there, giving a lecture. It was still different because even though I tried to make my classes dynamic and interactive, there's something about seeing like a bunch of chats pop up as you're speaking into a screen. It's very active. So really enjoy that. I still really enjoy public speaking. Again, it's a historical way of communicating, but I was actually just in Chicago giving a few talks to a couple different audiences there, and it was really, really great to talk with people afterwards and hear their questions and thoughts on information science, psychological bias, and get to connect with them and hear that they connected with something I was speaking about. Like that to me is probably the thing that I enjoy the most, is like, okay, I studied this thing or I wrote a book and then I present it and it makes people think about something and they want to share that with me. And then maybe I learn something new from them. They learn something new from me. Like to me, that's the most powerful or most gratifying way of science communication.
That's awesome.
Is at that scale of those personal connections you have with people directly.
I love that. And it seems that the answer is their value to each of the different tools and each of the different mediums in which you communicate with people, because you've increased the scope and the range of the dialogue that you can have, even if dialogue is a broader, more broadly defined word now. That's awesome. Last question, and it's a big one before we get to our closing segment question. How does everything we've discussed already get magnified by AI and by the actors who will utilize AI maliciously to spread misinformation, as you say, or disinformation in service of their profits or personal gains?
I mean, the short answer is it basically makes everything that we've discussed and are concerned about, it makes it all worse. It's an amplifier. So like this idea of being in echo chambers, AI is going to make it, you can hyper personalize exactly what you want to see and pump out that particular type of content and only see that particular type of content. I worry about chatbots that they're going to be where you just interact with this chatbot that just affirms everything that you want to hear. There's already research showing that these chatbots that are affirming ideology can increase polarization and bias. And it makes sense. It's like, instead of taking an extra step to curate a social media feed that agrees with you, you now can have a chatbot that agrees with you and you're getting this kind of support. So in many ways, it's more of the same, even though we talk about it as this big new thing. It's really just amplifying a lot of the worst elements of the internet and the internet experience. And that's outside of the broader critiques of consolidation of power and the lack of democratic thinking, small d democratic thinking, of how, people's role are like, this is a whole, I know we're getting towards the end. This is a whole other tangent of just like the lack of democratic thinking, again, small d democratic, like lots of people coming together and talking about what's best for their community. It's not aligning with the incentives of these large AI companies. Like they're not listening to people. There's not representatives of, hey, like maybe we don't want AI pushed in us all the time. Like maybe we don't want this. Maybe we don't want this AI center in our backyard, this big data center. Like maybe we don't want our AI to be pushed into the workplace. Again, there's a lot of it's a big discussion, but I wish there was at least more discussion of people overall. And again, that's a whole issue with, the accumulation of capital and what that
Right.
looks like.
No, and the consolidation of power, as you said. I had an episode. I'll send you the link. It was a few weeks back with a friend and an advocate, social media strategist and podcaster,
Mhm,
Marissa Estrada, or Ritzy
mhm,
P, as she goes by. And her big thing was just that, right? This
mhm,
idea that she's a first generation Mexicana, strong, powerful Latina, single mom, mixed race kid, right? Like all the boxes get checked. And her fear is that we didn't learn the lessons from the internet
right.
1.0, right? Where we kind of just trusted the big companies and said like, oh, you internet tech guys, you're going to save the world and make it better and bring us together. Cause that's what they kept telling us. Right. And now we're doing it again,
Yeah.
right? With this next
Yeah.
supposedly, historically breakthrough level technology that's going to change and affect all our lives. We're basically just handing over to now even fewer competitors and fewer companies and fewer leaders. And there
Right.
aren't those indigenous voices at the table.
Mhm,
There isn't even like a space in the public sphere of discourse that isn't like way off in the corner that no one would ever see. There isn't like a loud enough, proud enough space for people to challenge
yeah.
the momentum. That's what I hear in the way you described it. Is it's almost like this inevitable momentum that seems to be picking up, and it's like, wait a minute, like I'm not saying, and I just said this to a friend on an episode last couple weeks ago. Like, I'm not being a luddite about
Hmm.
artificial intelligence or technology. My entire career has been built around technologies, right?
Mhm.
But I'm being like a cautious, thoughtful person about it.
Yeah.
And that seems to be what you're saying is the risk that we head down this path. So yeah, that's
Absolutely.
not good, not good. But I raised the question because we've got to talk about it. Like we've got to keep adding more perspectives
Yep.
to it because AI is going to be great. Trust me, that's just not going to. I'm too old to trust me. That's not going to work anymore because
Yeah.
it's historically not ever worked out for most people. By the way,
Mhm.
that's the problem. Is
Most people, exactly.
yeah, we forget. Most people later become like marginalized people, and it's like no. They were actually most of us were that
Mhm,
before
mhm.
you consolidated so much power that you then left the rest of us to be marginalized. But the
Yeah.
majority is still the majority, right? So,
Right.
all right, one last question, a little bit lighter than that one. That was a big one there. We could have done a whole weekend, and maybe we will come back and do a whole other podcast at some point about
Sure.
that. But this is a more of like a tactical, practical takeaway. So someone who's been listening to this really deep, very enjoyable conversation, thank you so much for this so far. But we want to leave them with a couple of bullet point ideas on what they can do, how they can apply when they hang up listening to this into their daily lives, right? So if someone's listening and they want to become more, my phrase, misinformation resistant or aware, what are three just kind of simple, small daily habits that they could begin practicing right now to enable them to become more misinformation aware or misinformation resistant?
Yeah. Great question. I think the first one is connected to that concept of critical ignoring. So being mindful of how we consume content online, setting timers, reflecting on how you use social media, any type of self-nudging towards gaining more of your attention back. So that can be a variety of things that we already discussed. Um, the second one is reflecting on your own identity structures. Also, something we discussed. Like if you have, like you can literally draw on a map, like write your identities, cluster the ones that overlap together that you care about, see how much spatial distance there is between other identities. And ideally, again, to be more resilient, you would have more space. So if all your identities are clustering around each other, that gives you an indicator of, oh, this is something that could potentially create bias. And then you can work on it. Like maybe you can think about, meeting people who think differently than you or doing different activities. And also, I think broadly, it is important to try and reflect on different perspectives as best we can, as much mental space as we can. I personally consume a variety of media, a lot of media from people that I don't agree with politically or philosophically, but I find it interesting and helpful to reflect on where they're coming from and to understand their perspectives and their backgrounds and why they have those different ideas. So when I do encounter people who share those beliefs in real life, I at least have a framework and a language to connect with them. And it's not this foreign thing that I've never heard before. And the last one, also connected to what we were talking about, in order to broaden our identity maps, that requires us seeking out new activities and new hobbies. So It sounds so simple, but honestly, one of the best ways for us to protect ourselves against misinformation is to develop a broad set of identities and interests and hobbies. So it can be like joining a recreational sports league. I think would actually be very helpful because you're getting outside, you're moving around,
Yeah.
you're not spending as much time on the internet because you have to, hit the softball or whatever, and you're meeting lots of different people. And you're creating this identity that you might care about, and it's automatically expanding your identity map. Like you have, softball player there, and that's going to take up some amount of space. That also removes some of the space of, I'm a strong partisan and that's all I care about.
Mm-hmm.
So you're automatically building that and broadening your identity map. So I think
Love
those
that.
three things are things that are everyday things that I try to do, and I would suggest could improve information or misinformation resilience.
Fantastic insights and super simple. I mean, they're like simple to be explored and tried by anybody who's listening, right? And thank you for that, because again, we took everybody on a journey, right? I knew this episode was going to be a little bit longer than our typical episode because there's just no way to deal with the depth and richness. And frankly, as I said in the opening, to me, the importance of this kind of a conversation, not that you or I are that important singularly, but as catalysts for this broader conversation about this topic and these topics. Like we are woefully undereducated and underprepared today, societally, globally, not just in the United States. And we are in danger of, as Lita McCullough-Seletsky, one of our recent guests and an incredible author and teacher of writing, talked to us about, like, we're in danger of letting some fundamental parts of our humanity slip away from us.
Yeah.
If we don't have these conversations and ask ourselves, and me again as a proxy for everybody else, sit down and have long form conversations with you to try and pull apart all the nuances of what this is that you are obsessed about. And in that sense, I thank you for this, because I always say I thank every one of our guests. I thank every one of you. By the way, we call you alumnus now. We don't just call you a former guest, because I fundamentally do believe that you are a part of a community of people who are thinking more entrepreneurially about a whole bunch of different things in our lives. And I do that as a proxy for everybody else, because I say, I'm just asking questions that I'm curious about, right? That I know other people are probably curious about, but maybe they don't get the chance to have a long form conversation with someone like yourself. And I am grateful because you do wake up every day obsessively thinking about something that, although I think about this a lot because of our current conundrum we live under, like I know you think about it more than I do. Right. And so I know by far you think about it many times more on a daily basis than the average person who listens to our show, because those people are expert and they think obsessively about the things that they're involved in their lives. Right.
Yeah.
So I'm really, really grateful for that. And to that, let's make sure we tell people a million different ways to find you and connect with you. So how do we find you on socials? Where can we buy the book, Misguided? Where can we find the podcast, Misguided, the podcast? Where can people sign up for, just Substack is self-describing, but like, where can we find your Substack newsletter, et cetera?
Yeah. So if you just Google me, one helpful thing about having a unique name is that I'm easy to find. So Matthew Facciani, I'm most active on Threads and Blue Sky and Instagram. Those are the social media I mostly use. But I also have a podcast, Misguided the Podcast. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the major platform hosting sites. My newsletter is on Substack. I also write on Psychology Today. Oftentimes it's just the similar topics just posted on there as well. My book, Misguided, is all about a lot of what we discussed today. So I really do a deep dive in how and why people believe false information and what can we do about it. It's available at all major book retailers. And yeah, I mean, and then my website, I update somewhat regularly, sharing all the updates on things I'm working on. But I'm out there. I'm in a lot of spaces doing a lot of different things. And it's been, like you mentioned before, in many ways, this has been an opportunity to do a lot of cool things that I otherwise may not have had the chance to do. So
yeah, it's awesome. And you are very good at it. Bill Nye, the social sciences guy.
Thank you.
We love it. That is my moniker for you for life now. I'm really appreciative of it. Thank you for your time. Thanks for the insights. Thanks for the positive energy. I sense you are a pragmatic optimist like me. So in spite of the overwhelming challenges that we face, I think you are leaning into trying to understand this all in the light of like, hey, we need to be better prepared for how we're going to come out of this all.
Yeah.
So I'm really, really appreciative of all that. Thank you for your time, buddy.
Thank you so much. It was great. I really enjoyed talking with you today.
My pleasure. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did recording it. As always, we thank you so much for listening and watching. Today's show was recorded here in Los Angeles and produced by the incomparable Deanna Bernal in Mexico City. You know, we can only grow this show by you listening and sharing the show with friends. So please find, like, follow, subscribe, and share our audio-only show on Spotify, Apple, or via any other popular podcasting platforms, as well as find the video version of our show now available on our YouTube channel over at Entrepreneurial Thinkers. And of course, you can follow along on our various social media platforms for fun and informative clips and content at Entrepreneurial Thinkers, wherever you can find us. And if you'd like to connect with me, you can find me at I Am Rob Ryan on just about any social media platform. Gracias, thank you, and have an awesome day.